In the dim glow of a flickering desk lamp, Elias Hawthorne clutched the foreclosure notice like a venomous snake, his knuckles whitening against the crisp bond paper. The year was 1887, and the town of Dust Haven, Wyoming, was choking on the dust of broken dreams. Elias, the banker with a spine forged from ledgers and ink, had just sealed the fate of the largest ranch this side of the Rockies. No more extensions, he'd murmured to himself, his voice a dry whisper in the empty vault of his heart. But as the clock struck midnight, a shadow eclipsed the moon outside his window, a silhouette so vast it seemed to swallow the stars. The door to the bank exploded inward with a crack like thunder, and there stood Boone Giant McCall, the cowboy whose boots alone could crush a man's resolve. His eyes, wild as a mustang's under the brim of a Stetson scarred by sagebrush wars, locked onto Elias. "Your small body's too tight, banker," Boone rumbled, his voice a low avalanche, "but I'll stretch you raw." The words hung in the air like smoke from a six-shooter, and Elias's world tilted on its axis, for in that moment, he wasn't sure if he faced a savior or a storm. Elias had always measured life in columns, assets on the left, liabilities on the right. At 42, he was a wisp of a man, 5'6" in his polished boots, with a frame that spoke of too many nights bent over books and too few under open skies. Born in Boston to a family of merchants who traded souls for silver, he'd fled east for the promise of the frontier, only to build walls higher than any canyon. Dust Haven's bank was his fortress, its iron vault his unyielding heart. Folks whispered he had ice in his veins, that he'd once denied a widow's plea for a dime's extension, watching her homestead auctioned off like yesterday's hay. But Elias told himself it was necessity, progress demanded sacrifice. The railroad was coming, they said, and with it, fortunes for those who played the game right. Boone McCall's ranch, sprawling across 5,000 acres of golden grass and whispering pines, was collateral in that game. Drought had bitten deep, cattle thinned to shadows, and Boone's loan payments lagged like a lame horse. Elias had drawn the line 3 months prior, his pen slicing through hope like a scythe. Boone, though, Boone was a force of nature carved from the Badlands themselves. 6'7", with shoulders broad as a barn door and hands calloused from roping tempests, he was the kind of man who made mountains seem polite. They'd called him Giant since he was knee-high to a grasshopper, outgrowing his pa's trousers before he could spell his name. Orphaned young by a Comanche raid that left scars deeper than any blade, Boone had clawed his way up from stable boy to ranch king, his herd once the envy of Cheyenne. He wore his heart on his sleeve, stitched with rawhide and regret, a widower twice over, first to fever, second to the bottle after the first. His daughter, little Mira, 8 years old with curls like prairie sunsets, was the only light left in his thundercloud eyes. The ranch wasn't just land to Boone, it was the cradle that rocked Myra's laughter, the soil where his wife's ghost still danced in the wildflowers. Losing it meant losing her future, and that fire had driven him through the night to Elias's door, whiskey on his breath but steel in his soul. The banker's office reeked of oiled wood and stale tobacco as Boone loomed in the threshold, his duster shedding dust like autumn leaves. Elias scrambled back, heart hammering against ribs that felt suddenly too frail. "Mr. McCall, this is highly irregular, after hours, no less. The notice is final. Appeals go through the territorial office in Laramie." His voice cracked like brittle parchment, but he straightened his vest, clinging to protocol as if it were armor. Boone didn't advance. Instead, he pulled a weathered chair, meant for lesser men, and folded his frame into it with a groan of protesting oak. The seat creaked like it might splinter, mirroring the fracture in Elias's composure. "Irregular?" Boone echoed, his laugh a rumble that shook the inkwell. "Boy, life's been irregular since the day I drew breath. You sit there, tallying numbers like they're the 10 Commandments, but you ain't counted the cost of flesh and blood. Myra's got nightmares 'bout coyotes stealin' her away 'cause the bunkhouse roof leaks like a sieve. That ranch is her whole damn world, and you're fixin' to burn it down for a fistful of greenbacks." Elias swallowed, his throat tight as a noose. He'd heard the rumors, Myra's frail cough from the damp, Boone's late-night vigils mending fences by lantern light. But numbers didn't cough, they didn't dream. It's business, Mr. McCall. The investors demand security. Your operation's hemorrhaging, drought, market dips. I can't. Boone's hand shot out, not in threat, but to slap a crumpled photograph onto the desk. It was Mira, gap-toothed and grinning atop a pony, Boone's arm a protective oak around her. Look at her, Elias. Not numbers. Her. You got a daughter? A son? Something that keeps the dark at bay? The question pierced like a branding iron. Elias's mind flashed to Emily, his own girl, lost to diphtheria 5 years back in that Boston blizzard. She'd been 7, her small hand slipping from his as the fever claimed her. He'd buried that grief under ledgers, convinced structure could staunch the bleed. But here it was, raw and resurrected, in the giant's gaze. She died, Elias whispered, the words escaping like steam from a cracked boiler. Boone's eyes softened, the storm parting for a sliver of sun. Then you know. Tight as a drum, that grief clenches the chest till you can't breathe. But holding on too hard snaps the hide. I ain't here to beg, banker. I'm here to stretch you, pull you out of that shell before it crushes what's left. The night unspooled like a frayed lasso, Boone's words weaving through the silence like threads of smoke. He didn't rage, instead, he spun tales of the ranch, not of profit margins, but of sunrises painting the buttes crimson, of roundup feasts where vaqueros sang corridos under starlit skies. Elias listened, unbidden, his defenses cracking with each anecdote. Boone spoke of his first wife, Rosa, a Mexican healer with hands that coaxed life from barren earth, how she'd planted an orchard that still bore peaches sweet as her laugh. Of his second, Clara, the schoolmarm who taught him letters and love, only for the whiskey to whisper her away after Myra's birth. Grief's a wild mustang, Elias, Boone said, leaning forward, his shadow engulfing the desk. You gotta ride it gentle, not whip it to death. I been tight myself, clenched fists and bitter nights. But Mira, she stretches me. Makes room for light. Elias's fingers trembled on the photo, tracing Myra's smile. For the first time in years, he felt the ache not as a wound, but as space, empty, waiting to be filled. Dawn crept through the blinds like a hesitant visitor, gilding the room in gold. Boone rose, joints popping like distant gunfire. Come see it, then. The ranch. Before the auctioneer's gavel falls. Ain't promisin' miracles, but maybe a glimpse of what's worth fightin' for. Elias should have refused. Protocol screamed it, banks didn't ride shotgun on whims. But the hook was set, Boone's raw honesty had lodged in his ribs, tugging him toward uncharted canyons. By noon, he was astride a borrowed mare, her gait unsteady under his city-bred frame, trailing Boone's massive roan through dust-choked trails. The giant rode like he was born to the saddle, a centaur of leather and grit, humming a low ballad that carried on the wind. They crested the ridge overlooking McCall Ranch, and Elias's breath caught. It wasn't the ledger's barren figures he saw, but a living tapestry, cattle grazing lazy on emerald slopes, the orchard's boughs heavy with fruit, Mira chasing chickens with shrieks of joy. She spotted them from afar, a whirlwind of pigtails and freckles, barreling toward Boone with arms outstretched. Papa! You brung the money, man. Does he like pie? Boone scooped her up, her laughter bubbling like a spring, and shot Elias a wink. Reckon he might, Sprout. Mr. Hawthorne here's got a hollow leg for kindness. Elias dismounted, legs wobbling, and accepted a sticky hug that smelled of wild honey and home. In that embrace, something shifted, a loosening, like a knot finally giving way. The afternoon unfolded in unexpected grace. Mira dragged Elias to the orchard, her small hand engulfing his, chattering about fireflies that danced like fairies and a creek where wishes stuck to smooth stones. Boone worked the fences nearby, his hammer strikes rhythmic as a heartbeat, pausing only to share stories of lost trails and found kin. Over peach pie, flaky crust cradling fruit kissed by sun. Elias confessed fragments of his own shattered ledger, Emily's drawings, yellowed and tucked in a drawer, the wife who'd left him to his numbers, seeking warmth in another's arms. "I thought order would save me," he admitted, voice thick as the pie's filling. "But it just tightened the noose." Boone nodded, carving a peach with his knife, offering half on the blade. "That's the trick of it, friend. Life ain't a balance sheet, it's a bellows. Gotta breathe it wide, let the hurt in, let the heel out. I was gonna storm your bank last night, fists flyin'. But anger's a small man's rope, kindness. That's the giant's lasso. Pulls you toward tomorrow." As the sun dipped, painting the sky in bruises of violet, Mira pressed a pebble into Elias's palm, a wishing stone, she declared, rough-edged but warm. "Make it good, Mr. Hall. For Emily. For us." He pocketed it, the weight a talisman against the void. But the frontier doesn't yield to sentiment without a fight. That night, as Elias rode back to Dust Haven, thunderheads gathered like unpaid debts, the air electric with promise and peril. He pored over Boone's file by lamplight, fingers itching for the pen that could rewrite fates. The numbers still bled red, but now they whispered of potential, irrigation channels half dug, a new strain of drought-hardy grass Boone had trialed in secret. Elias drafted a letter to the investors, not a plea, but a proposition. Collateral in calves, not just land, extensions tied to milestones, not blind faith. It was a gamble, stretching the bank's thin margins like taffy, but for the first time, the risk felt alive, not lethal. Sleep evaded him, chased by dreams of Emily skipping through orchards, her laughter mingling with Myra's. Dawn brought the storm, not in rain, but in riders, 3 of them, hard-eyed claim jumpers from the south, drawn by whispers of a rancher's fall. They'd bushwhacked Boone on his morning patrol, leaving him bloodied in the arroyo, ribs cracked like dry earth. Word reached Dust Haven by telegraph, a frantic staccato that jolted Elias from his desk. Heart slamming like a safe's tumblers, he saddled the mare without a second thought, grabbing the bank's medical kit and a scattergun he hadn't fired since his greenhorn days. The trail blurred in a haze of dust and dread, Elias urging the horse to speeds that blurred the line between flight and folly. He found them at the ranch's edge, Boone slumped against a boulder, face a mask of crimson, Mira huddled beside him, her wishing stones clutched like ammunition. The jumpers circled like vultures, one dismounting with a sneer. "Banker's lapdog, eh? This land's free pickings now. McCall here's done." Elias's voice, when it came, was steady as granite. "Not today. Not ever." He leveled the gun, the weight foreign yet fierce in his grip. The leader laughed, drawing iron, but Elias fired first, not to kill, but to warn, the shot splintering a cactus arm's length away. "Walk away. The ranch stands. I've wired the territorial marshal, your warrants precede you like bad debts." Bluff or truth? Elias didn't know, the wires were sent in his mind, but the conviction in his tone made it gospel. The jumpers hesitated, eyes flicking to Boone's defiant glare, then spurred their mounts into retreat, curses trailing like contrails. Elias dropped to his knees beside Boone, hands shaking as he bound wounds with strips from his own shirt. "Fool cowboy," he muttered, voice breaking. "Stretching me raw, you said. Feels like you near broke me." Boone coughed, a wet rasp, but his grin split the blood. "Worth it, brother. Look at you, ridin' thunder, standin' tall. That's the stretch, from tight wound to wide open." Mira flung herself into Elias's arms, sobbing against his neck, and he held her, the pebble in his pocket a pulse against his thigh. Word of the standoff spread like wildfire through Dust Haven, tales of the banker who bared teeth for a stranger's hearth. Investors, swayed by Elias's revised proposal and the romance of redemption, approved the extension by week's end. Boone's ranch breathed anew, irrigation flowing like veins to parched soil, the herd swelling under careful stewardship. Months wove into seasons,